Good morning, Liberty. It is Wednesday morning, January 9th, 2019. My name is Michael Boldin, broadcasting to you live here on the West Coast from my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in, whether you're watching live or in the archive. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I want to talk about asset forfeiture. I know basically every other podcast and YouTube show, at least in the politics and liberty realm, is talking about the big speech last night and the border situation, and I have my own opinions on that, but they're not really formed completely. So I want to keep focusing on what we do best on the 10th at the 10th Amendment Center, which is look at programs that shouldn't exist, that violate liberty, and how we can take action on a state or a local level to undermine, resist, and nullify them. So being that this is the early parts of the nullification season. That's the time of year, generally from around January through around April, when most state legislatures are in session. If you're like me here in California or in Michigan or New Jersey, unfortunately, you are punished with a full year-round legislature. Well, California not full, but pretty close to it. Ohio, I think, is another one. So, unfortunately, for those of us who don't have short legislative sessions, like, for example, in Texas, they meet about 5 months every 2 years. In Nevada, I think it's 90 days every 2 years, so you get less damage in some ways, although there's a real flurry of legislation to try to do bad things. But amongst all that bad legislation, we do find this growing movement on an issue-by-issue basis to advance liberty in the face of government at state, federal, and local level that really generally doesn't want it. So I guess we're going to keep highlighting that and encouraging more people to get on board with that effort. On Monday, I reported on constitutional carry legislation being filed in 3 states. I found yesterday, as I went through my bill tracking for the day, I'm doing that most every day of the week right now because there's so many bills being filed. And there's now 4. So North Dakota is the newest one. We don't have a report on it yet, but I think Mike Meharry is going to be covering that, or TJ Martinell will be covering that pretty soon. So there's now 4 states that we're monitoring that are advancing or going to be considering constitutional carry legislation. So, but it's important for activists then to be on board and to make calls in the state where they live to their own state legislators, representative and senator, and say, hey, I want you to support this bill. So if you go to all of our archives over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, I'm not sure if you missed that episode or not, but go back. You'll find constitutional carry bills introduced in 3 states, and you can find the links to those. We'll be adding the North Dakota one as soon as we have a report on that as well. But make the phone calls. Say you support the bill, and this will increase the likelihood one person can actually make a difference. Generally, it's about 10. But you need 10 individuals to do it. So today I want to talk about 5 states that are taking on asset forfeiture programs, both state and federal in most of those situations. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of those actual states, what they are, the bills, etc., I guess it's important to kind of go over what asset forfeiture is. There's different types. There's civil and criminal, and then there's also the state level, and then the federal equitable sharing program. But before getting to that, I want to say hello to all the great people out in the live chat here on YouTube. If you don't join us Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, I do encourage you to stop by when you can. It's a lot of fun. I love the interaction, all the people that I see here on a regular basis, and every time there's a new icon, a new name out there, it's really cool. It's something I learned through my nephews always being on YouTube and then watching my friend Robert Scott Bell, who does Sunday through Friday, a radio show, but he also simulcasts through YouTube, the Robert Scott Bell Show. It's about health freedom. You're going to find a lot of kind of naturopathic or homeopathic remedies, but then he also does a lot of political healing, and that's why he talks about it too. And he's had both myself and Mike Meharry on the show a number of times to talk about things that relate to health freedom, things like dealing with raw milk prohibition, the fact that the federal government believes that it has the power to not only ban the sale of raw milk across state lines, but they also hold the position that they can ban intrastate sales or hemp legalization, CBD, things like that. So I got the idea to do that, and I really, really enjoy seeing people in the chat and the questions and the engagement and when people challenge me and things like that. So hi to Joseph Standridge, 2V News, yes, bearer of the good news today. Yes, especially asset forfeiture, which I think is one of the most dangerous threats to liberty. There are so many, of course, gun control, mass surveillance, the warfare state, but it certainly has a significant impact on average people. Woodsider, Justin Bayola, Larry Clark, Existence, EHP Training, Pete Dolan, Lazy Viewer. Is awesome to see you guys all here. So whether you are watching live or if you happen to stop by later on in the archives or if you're watching here on YouTube or one of our other channels, we're now posting all of these shows to BitChute, Brighteon.com, BitTube, and Keyport.tv. So 4 other platforms. If you happen to use them, go in and say hello. We don't get tons of views there, but every now and then we'll find one that really pops off. So, for example, the Constitutional Carry Report got way more views on BitChute. Last I looked, it was more than double than here on YouTube. So that's really cool. I'm glad we're reaching new people. And a good reminder from EHP Training. I have been forgetting to remind everybody to do this, but if you are watching, whether it's live or later on in the archive, smash the like button. This is one of the most important things that you can do that is very simple, costs nothing, just a tap of that like button, make sure to smash it so they really know. Helps tell the platform that you're watching or listening on that you like it and that they should show it to other people. And our numbers are consistently growing. What I like seeing a lot is that although our numbers aren't huge, they're going up. I look at the statistics every about week or two, and not only are the subscribers consistently going up more and more than they did before I started doing 3 shows a week, but we're finding that people are, because of this, they're looking through and viewing old videos that I kind of have been out of the loop that I should really spend more time promoting. So that's really awesome. And then before moving forward, hi to Heather Rossi, and thank you to Lazy Viewer, Larry Clark, and EHP for smashing the like button. Lazy Viewer has a great comment. Everything DC does is theft. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're living on taxation, and taxation is theft, that should be its own show. So let's get into asset forfeiture. Asset forfeiture absolutely is theft. It could be called armed robbery. I don't know, maybe there's another name for it. I think armed robbery is a good one, but theft is easy, especially because blank is theft is very popular in the libertarian movement, and it's true, and it's important to remind people of this. So I want to go through 2 quick reports that Mike Meharry did on these sometime around October or so of last year. Very short blogs. They're listed in the show notes here on YouTube. You'll also find them, of course, over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. Oh, I forgot to mention as I was listing all those platforms, we're also, we post the show as a podcast, audio-only edition, also on iTunes, Spotify, and Google. So any reviews and positive feedback on that is very helpful as well. So Mike did these 2 reports. I wanted him to separate it because sometimes it gets a little bit confusing because you take asset forfeiture on its own, you've got civil and criminal on the state level, and then you have this federal program. And how does it interact? Can you stop it? What can you do? How do they cause problems, etc.? So first of all, what is asset forfeiture is the first report that I want to cover. It's a short blog, and if I can get the video to pop up here with an extra click, we'll be able to take a look at it. I'm just going to go through this pretty briefly here. But Mike starts out his report by saying, asset forfeiture is the process by which government confiscates a person's property, generally after asserting it was involved in or the proceeds from a crime. He says, police often seize property as part of the investigative process. In many states, they don't even have to make an arrest. They take any assets they suspect were used in criminal activity or that they believe were proceeds from a crime. For instance, officers could seize a car they suspected was used to facilitate a drug deal or cash they thought somebody got from selling drugs. Now, the drug war is one of the leading kind of motivators behind this. So it's good that he pointed that out. There are other reasons that they use forfeiture, but the drug war, which is an atrocity in and of itself, has driven a lot of this. So they say we have to stop the drug dealers, so therefore we have to use these extraordinary measures, and then they become day-to-day life, and it expands from there. Because as soon as you give government an inch, they're of course going to take a mile, if not more. Mike points out next. Now, before getting into that, so once they're seized, once the property is seized, it becomes subject to the judicial process. If the state prevails, then they keep it. If they don't, then it goes back. But the process is pretty weird on top of that because you have criminal and civil. Now, criminal seems the way it should be, but, I mean, the base principle, if you're convicted of a crime and you're benefiting from the crime, that you're not going to be able to keep those proceeds. That is the general idea behind it. I don't know whether or not criminal asset forfeiture is abused. If there is an expert out there who knows, I'm just generally going to skip over that because that's the general process. But most states and the federal government really aren't using criminal forfeiture. They're using something called civil. And Mike points out in his blog, he says, on the other hand, civil asset forfeiture does not require a guilty verdict. Isn't that odd? You know, somebody, some cop is going to say, oh, I think you used this in a crime, so you don't get to keep this car. Well, don't you have to prove? Isn't it innocent until proven guilty? Well, not with civil asset forfeiture, and that's why it's robbery. And he goes on, Mike goes on. In some states, it doesn't even require the owner to be charged with a crime. That's how bad it is. In this process, the property itself is literally charged with a crime and is the subject of the legal proceedings. Property owners must prove that the property wasn't involved in criminal activity. This flips due process on its head, forcing the owner to prove the property's innocence. Now, if this sounds a little hokey, a little stupid, a little crazy town, it's because it is. It is very real, and there are hundreds of millions of dollars being confiscated in this process over the years. It is really, really bad. And I don't have the stats on this right here, but the best organization in the country on asset forfeiture, we're kind of a lagging indicator here at the 10th Amendment Center. The best organization, the leaders on this really is the Institute for Justice. It's ij.org. They do all kinds of research papers on this. They do an annual report that grades all of the states and tells you who's good and who's bad or who's less bad, really, if they're grading on a curve. And they're the ones that you're going to find all the detailed info on this. But there's a lot of money being seized, a lot of property. And a lot of times when they take property, they do auctions. And a lot of budgets for law enforcement agencies are funded by this. A few years ago, New Mexico was one of the first ones to start instituting really strong restrictions on asset forfeiture, both state and federal. And there was this great outcry that the law enforcement in Albuquerque wasn't going to be able to cover their budget because they're relying on taking property that wasn't convicted, that someone wasn't possibly even charged with a crime. If you think about that, the motivation becomes a real perverse incentive. If you build a budget that's based off of taking people's stuff, just on the word of someone saying, well, I think this was used improperly or you gained improperly, then it's going to encourage them to keep doing it because with inflation through the Federal Reserve, budgets always have to keep growing. It's not a deflationary economy. You have to keep spending more and more to keep even at the same pace. And then, of course, the mentality that somehow law enforcement is hampered, and that you have to keep expanding on it, that builds into it. So, of course, it's going to keep driving more and more of this. And Mike covers this a little bit in this short blog. He says, how is asset forfeiture lucrative? He says, in many states, law enforcement agencies get to keep some or all of the proceeds from forfeitures. It says some or all. I got to edit that. This creates a perverse policing for profit motive. And I think that really comes from Institute for Justice, the policing for profit reports that they do. Forfeiture proceeds can supplement department budgets and even serve as an indispensable funding source. As a result, law enforcement agencies become incentivized to seize as much property as possible. So it's really, really dangerous. and it encourages really bad activity. That's the state level, civil and criminal. Now, there's the federal program. Now, we know if you hear me talk all the time, the general rule of thumb is that the federal government doesn't do much enforcement of anything. For those of you who believe in the right to keep and bear arms, that's very good news. For example, there's only around 5,000 to 6,000 ATF agents for the entire country, with about a third of them in administration. That means the vast majority of gun enforcement actions are not done by Washington, D.C. But a lot of times, and same with the drug war, the FBI statistics that I've seen say somewhere around 98 out of 100 marijuana arrests are done by state or local law enforcement and not by the FBI or not by anyone in Washington, D.C., the DEA. So it's this kind of funding incentive, whether it's through grant programs or you're going to join these joint task forces, or we're going to give you asset forfeiture, which we're going to learn about here in this equitable sharing program, that this causes an incentive for the local police to basically act like federal agents or to enforce federal programs for the federal government. So the next thing, and I did a video on this, published like a 2-minute video about a week and a half ago. It's called What is Equitable Sharing? Maybe I can pull that up. I'll add it to the links later on so I don't have to kind of pause too much and kind of dig that up. But it's on YouTube. If you just did a search for equitable sharing, it gives an overview basically of what I'm going to talk about here. And this is another report from Mike from October 29th of last year. And this, it could be 2018 or 2012 or 2022. The program is exactly the same. It's called Equitable Sharing. This is a federal asset forfeiture program that incentivizes, Mike says, state and local police to bypass state-level restrictions on asset forfeiture. And he goes on, through a process known as adoption, the federal government prosecutes the federal case under federal law, the forfeiture case under federal law, and splits the proceeds with local police. So it starts out as a local case. The cops pull somebody over. Maybe they suspect, maybe they have evidence, maybe they think that the person's a drug dealer. We don't know if they have evidence or not. We don't know if there's a conviction or not. Sometimes the states say you have to have a criminal. Well, let me explain this a little bit more. I think Mike does a better job explaining it. He says, some states require a conviction before prosecutors can permanently seize assets and don't allow law enforcement agencies to keep forfeiture proceeds. Equitable sharing creates a way for police to bypass these strict laws. So if a state has very good asset forfeiture laws, restricting civil or ending civil asset forfeiture and requiring only criminal, that you have to be convicted of something before someone can take your property. If a state has strong asset forfeiture restrictions and no restriction on the use of the equitable sharing program called adoption, then what happens is, let's say they pull somebody over, they say, okay, we want to take this car. Well, here in Sacramento, and the reason I say Sacramento is because this was a huge problem here in California for many years. Here in Sacramento, they've banned us from doing this without getting a criminal conviction. You know what? We're going to call our federal partners in the Department of Justice or the DEA and let them know the situation. And then the DEA says, oh, wow, that's very interesting. We can take the lead on this case. This sounds like a federal crime. So that's where the adoption. So the case is then adopted by the federal government. The state or local law enforcement agency that started the process continues to investigate and carry out the investigation. They handle almost the whole thing, just basically reporting back to Washington, D.C. Then they are at that point, they are federal agents working for a paycheck from the state. So Sacramento or the people of California are being robbed to pay them for their job that they're supposed to be doing following state law. Instead, they're spending time enforcing things for the DEA or for the DHS or for the FBI. And then on top of it, not only are they getting paid to do something that they're not really supposed to be doing, then on top of it, they get up to 80% of the proceeds in the equitable sharing program. So the feds basically do nothing. They get the case handed off to them, they keep 20%, and they send back 80% to the state and local law enforcement. And Mike points out that here in California, we faced this situation for quite a long time. The state actually had some of the strongest restrictions on state civil asset forfeiture in the country. It was actually really good. But because of this federal loophole, this equitable sharing loophole, there was no restriction on participating in it. So what did law enforcement all around the state do? They went nuts with it. Everything suddenly became a federal case. And in the Institute for Justice Policing for Profit report, California ranked as the worst offender of all states in the country between 2000 and 2013. And Mike says, in other words, California law enforcement was passing off a lot of cases to the feds and collecting the loot. The state closed the loophole. It was Senate Bill 443 back in 2016. Not fully closed. I would say about 80 to 85% of the time. So that is a huge positive step forward. They should close it fully. And hopefully State Senator Holly Mitchell, who is the lady who introduced that bill and worked it over 2 years, I believe, and got it passed, hopefully she'll follow up and close the loophole the rest of the time. Basically, they closed it for the situations, I think it's under 50,000. Anytime under 50,000. Most reports say that the average forfeiture is like $100 or $500, depending on the state. So most forfeiture proceedings, most civil forfeiture issues are happening to average people for stuff that they can't afford to lose. It's not the rich people, the big drug dealers. That's a tiny minority of it. So in the way to basically placate the law enforcement lobby, which is very aggressive everywhere in shutting down bills that advance liberty, the general approach has been strategically, okay, we can't get all of it shut down right away in most situations, so we'll set the bar at 50,000. So you can still make the claim that, well, with the statistics, because you're going to tell us we're going to let all the big drug dealers go. Well, we know the big drug dealers aren't worrying about $200. That's my Uncle Jeff down the street or something like that. So that is a very positive step forward. And statistics say it's about 80% shut closed. So now that we have that kind of base understanding of what's going on, state, criminal and civil, and then federal equitable sharing, then we know how to deal with it. We have to basically do two things at the same time, or you can take them on separately. So here in California, they first restricted the state level, but for 13 years, they ignored the federal. Finally, it got addressed 13 years later. Actually, it was 16 years later. So from 2000 to 2013, they were the worst, and then it finally was dealt with in 2016. And hopefully it'll be dealt with even further going forward. So a lot of people that introduce legislation to handle this, they tend to add restrictions on the use of civil forfeiture on the state level, and at the same time they add a clause in the bill that says we're not going to send these cases off to the federal government to do an end run around this. And sometimes it is almost that type of language. So let's go through some of the bills. First of all, there's Missouri House Bill 444 from Shamid Dogan, a representative from St. Louis. Now, Missouri, very similar to California, actually has very good or very strong restrictions on the use of civil asset forfeiture on the state level. But they're going crazy with the adoption. They're going crazy with the equitable sharing. So Dogan, now this is the second session in a row that I've seen this bill introduced. He's basically introducing a bill that only addresses the equitable sharing program to try to close that loophole. So House Bill 444 would prohibit Missouri law enforcement agencies or prosecutors from entering into agreements to transfer seized property to a federal agency unless it includes more than $10,000 in cash. One study, and I made a mistake on the numbers. I guess I put it too low. It's not 100 or 500. The average forfeiture is less than 10,000. So I guess if you do all the 200s and 500s and then someone's house of a couple $100,000 or someone's car of 30,000, it averages out to be less than 10,000. So the passage of HB 444, according to Mike's article, would slam close a loophole that allows state and local police to get around more strict state asset forfeiture laws in a vast majority of situations. That's excellent. If you live in Missouri, here's what you want to do. You want to call your state representative and your state senator, even though it's in the House. Let them know. Tell them, I support House Bill 444. I'd like to see you co-sponsor or introduce a similar bill. So on the House level, you want to see a co-sponsor for the bill. And in Missouri, they keep adding co-sponsors on as the legislation goes. I don't think this one has any at this point. It doesn't show any co-sponsors. So it's good for Shahmed to be introducing the bill, and now it would be very helpful for him to get some co-sponsors on it. So call your own state representative, Democrat, Republican, it does not matter. Super pro-law enforcement, against. Pro-drug war, against. It does not matter. They just need to hear from you. And a lot of them are bad, so it's not likely that they're going to take positive action. But the phone call or the email. If you don't want to make the phone call, send an email. If you hear nothing back, follow up with a phone call. If you get a form letter back, follow up with a phone call. This is the process. Whatever the bill, whatever the state, whatever the issue. So Missouri House Bill 444 addresses just the federal equitable sharing program, shutting the loophole for everything under $100,000. I'm assuming, based on what I've seen, this is closer to 90% of the cases now, because 50,000, at least from a Colorado study, was between 80 and 85%. Now, the next bill, we don't actually have a report on it. I just found it last night as I was going through my bill tracking searches. You see the spreadsheet. I'll show it to you guys one of these days. But House Bill 1286, I don't know. It's a really long piece of legislation. Mike Meharry's probably going to go through it and analyze it a little bit. And we'll probably, if we need to, we'll reach out to Institute for Justice to see what they're saying about it. And so it's a really long piece of legislation. And it's possible that it's doing some very good things to deal with the civil asset forfeiture on a state level. I don't know. But what actually caught my eye was this piece in House Bill 1286. Section 29, prohibition on adoptive seizures and equitable sharing. And it's very straightforward. A law enforcement agency may not refer or initiate a transfer of property seized under state law to a federal agency by way of adoption or equitable sharing of seized property for the purpose of the property's forfeiture under federal law. Period. I mean, that's awesome. It's the first time I've actually seen anyone take it to the next level. So most states, when we've seen them try to address this, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nebraska, Ohio, Colorado, generally we've seen bills in recent years, starting back to about 2015, starting with a line at about 50,000. So from that point, we've seen it go up to 100,000 in bills introduced. Now, maybe this is a new baseline. I would love to see it. They're basically saying you can't do it at all, no matter what the monetary issue. Look, if it's banned under state law, you shouldn't be acting as federal agents. So this is an excellent piece of legislation on that front. It could be a lot of garbage in the rest of it. I don't know. Kind of like the Farm Bill. Most of the Farm Bill on the federal level was total crap, socialist garbage, ripping people off, subsidies, price controls. But the one shining light is that the federal government is generally getting out of the way of prohibition on hemp. They declassified or descheduled it, so the DEA will not be interfering with that anymore. So prohibition on adoptive seizures, again, if you're in North Dakota, only if you're in that state. Do not call or email if you're not living in the state of the bill that I'm mentioning, House Bill 1286. You could, let's say if you live in New Jersey, just as an example, and you like this piece of legislation, you could take the link that's in the show notes, both over at YouTube and then, of course, 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. And you could say, look, I found this bill. I heard about this bill in North Dakota. Here's a link to it. You can just send this. This is from Legiscan. Every legislator knows Legiscan. It's what we all use. I'm not a legislator, but it's what everybody in this kind of realm uses to search stuff. Send it to your state legislator. Look, I would like to see this thing on the adoptive seizures introduced in our state. And even in places where we see a general restriction, for example, here in California, anything under 50,000, I'm going to send this over to my state senator and state assembly person, not assemblyman, not in California. And I'm going to say, hey, let's close the loophole completely. If North Dakota can do it, and California was ahead of North Dakota on this, I think this should really ramp things up. So House Bill 1286 in North Dakota takes a very positive step, an incredible step on ending equitable sharing in the state completely. if it would pass. Over in Texas, it's similar to the other ones that I'm talking about. This is House Bill 404. There's a number of bills that have been introduced in Texas. This one, I think, is the one that's probably the best. The Institute of Justice gave Texas a really bad grade on their state asset forfeiture laws, a D+, calling them terrible. So Texas is one of the worst in the country, and they have no restrictions on the federal asset forfeiture program. A number of people have been trying to get bills introduced and passed on this for the past couple of sessions. It's only every other year, so it's a really slow process. Some Democrats, like Representative Senfornia Thompson in Houston, but also Senator Connie Burton, a Republican, she has been introducing bills on this for the past couple of sessions as well. But House Bill 404 would effectively, according to Mike's report, would effectively end civil asset forfeiture in Texas and replace it with a criminal forfeiture process. That's excellent. It also addresses the policing for profit motive by basically cutting off. I think this one is a level of $50,000. So anything under $50,000, they can't do any equitable sharing or adoption. For a state that's D+, one of the worst in the country, that's excellent. At least on the state level, turning it to criminal forfeiture, ending civil, and then in most situations, cutting back on the federal program as well. Again, House Bill 404. If you live in Texas, you definitely want to call your state representative and state senator to support that bill. Robert Sanderson, I'm not sure, mentioned, I asked my rep to co-sponsor it last night. Are you in Missouri? Or whatever state you're in, that's awesome. Let us know if you get a response back, positive or negative. Shoot an email our way, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Would love to know if somebody else is jumping on one of the pieces of legislation. Clay Davis just arrived. Sorry I'm late to the party. Good morning, Liberty. Good to see you, my friend. Steve Smith, cool. Rare chance to see the show live. The podcast still needs a lot more ratings and reviews, guys. Yes, we'll take as many as we can get. We're all being very consistent and growing. I'm going to keep doing this. I've been really bad about this channel, and I made a commitment last year that I was going to start really just being dedicated, because I know that absolutely you have to be consistent on YouTube to tell YouTube and the people who are here, all of you, you need to know that I'm going to be here, and it's not just going to be every now and then. So I am going to be consistent and keep doing this, and I see things growing. And as long as you guys like the show, then that's awesome. So Missouri, House Bill 302 and 444. 302, is that the Fourth Amendment bill or the gun rights bill? I'm going to do a quick search. Oh, yeah, this is an awesome piece of legislation. I want to cover this another time, but it's basically if we're looking at the strategy that people have used on marijuana on a state or a local level, part of the strategy has been decriminalizing something that the federal government has long called illegal. And then people get a medical, at least early on, they would get a medical waiver or a medical recommendation to use something that the federal government says they can't. And in many situations, that would ease up opposition. Well, a doctor saying this person needs it, I mean, that seems pretty legitimate. And over time, that's been very effective and very true, because a lot of times doctors, they're telling the truth. Not that we want to trust them all. But Missouri House Bill 302 decriminalizes firearm. They call it silencer. It's really a suppressor for people who get a medical certificate saying that they have significant hearing loss. So House Bill 302 is a really cool piece of legislation. Definitely want to hear back from you, Robert, if you get any positive feedback on either of those bills. Thank you for actually doing that. It's really important. The next bill is over in Indiana. We just have two more to cover. Indiana, very similar, from Senator Phil Boots, Senate Bill 97. On the state level, it requires a conviction in order to do forfeiture, so that's hugely important, but it also addresses the federal program. So Mike Meharry, again, reports on this. He's always doing the forfeiture reports. He does most of our reporting, which is great. The legislation, he's an actual reporter. He was a newspaper guy for many years, so his skill on this is really, really good. So Senate Bill 97, the legislation would require prosecutors to obtain a conviction of the person who possessed or used the seized property before moving forward with civil asset forfeiture proceedings in all contested cases. Under current law, Mike notes, the state can seize property simply by establishing it was connected to a crime by, quote, a preponderance of the evidence, a very low legal bar. To win an innocent owner claim, property owners bear the burden of proving their innocence in most cases, flipping due process on its head. So Senate Bill 97 in Indiana also closes the loophole, the federal loophole in most situations. I think I should mention to him we should probably make it more clear at what level, if it's 50,000 or 100,000 or like the North Dakota bill. I'm just doing a search on this piece of legislation. Federal adoptive seizure. Let's see if I can find the number. No, I don't know if it's 50,000, 100,000. These are the general bars. 50,000, 100,000, or North Dakota seems to be setting the new bar of completely ending the adoption program to get around state law. So either way, whatever level they're doing on the federal level, the fact that they're ending civil asset forfeiture with this bill, if it passes in Indiana, is very, very positive. Senate Bill 97, if you live in that state, call your state senator and representative. You want to tell them, be strong, but be respectful and courteous, human to human. Just say, hey, look, even if you know they're a bad person, if you've had bad interactions with them before, if you had none, if you talk trash about them on Facebook, who cares? Call them, Representative so-and-so. I support Senate Bill 97, and I just want you to be on board with that, with a co-sponsoring. Or can you file a similar bill in the other chamber? And then the last bill is in Virginia, House Bill 2096. This comes from Delegate Freitas. Now, this one is addressing the state level only. So generally, we don't report on those. Sometimes we do, not early on like this, but I did want to mention that this bill is out there. I think the action that we could take if living in Virginia on House Bill 2096 would be to call and ask for an amendment to the bill. There's plenty of places where they can add some legislation to it, and this often happens. Generally, it's in the bad level, so you want to start out with a really high bar, and then you can work your way back because they're going to do it to you anyways. But once this goes to committee and gets a hearing, then definitely anybody in that committee can propose an amendment. If it passes out of committee and it goes to the House floor, anybody on the House floor can propose an amendment. So if you live in Virginia, say, look, I like the idea behind House Bill 2096, but I'm concerned about the federal equitable sharing program. And then you can show them the North Dakota bill. Say, look what they're doing. They're dealing with it like we are on the state level, but they're also addressing this equitable sharing program because we know in all the other states that have done this, if you don't close that loophole, then they just simply start partnering with the federal government on everything that they want to seize anyways. So those are our 5 states: North Dakota, Missouri, Texas, Indiana, and Virginia so far that are considering legislation to deal with asset forfeiture. There's a very long process to this. It first gets assigned to a committee, then you have a committee hearing, then you have a debate in the committee, then you have a committee vote. Then if it gets out of committee, sometimes it goes to another committee and repeats that process. If not, it goes to the House or the Senate floor. Then once it's on the House or the Senate floor, then it has open debate. It has potential amendments. It's different in every state a little bit. And then it goes through a vote. And then that would be a second reading vote in most states. That's where you can have debate and amendments. And then after that, then it gets to a third vote. And then it gets sent, if it passes the third vote, then it gets sent to the other chamber and it goes through that same process. So making the phone calls, sending the emails are very important. Learning about what these issues are and how we can undermine and resist and nullify them through our own action is very helpful as well. I hope you found this all very interesting. To me, it is positive news, as 2VN News pointed out early on. There is something positive here in the midst of all the bad, all the infighting, all the political insanity in this world. There are some positive things moving forward. So back over into the live chat. Okay, I think I'm just kind of backing up. Lazy Viewer says asset forfeiture should just be squashed no matter criminal or civil. Philosophically, I'm with you on that as well. Someone posted a link, 2V News. I'm just clicking. And I don't know if there's a setting. They're calling it legalized plunder. Woodsider says piracy. Larry Clark agrees. I agree as well. I don't know. There might be a setting that someone knows about, but whenever you guys post a link, I have to go in and manually approve it. I don't mind that, but I'll see if I can figure that out because I haven't seen any spammers really come in here. But again, I appreciate you guys all watching. I hope you found it interesting, insightful, educational, fun to hang out, fun to listen to, fun to watch. I'm really enjoying this. Oh, and I don't know if you noticed, last night I added a new LED light, which hopefully improves the light quality, which used to be like this if you're watching, and now it's like this. It might be a little too bright, but I'm going to check it out later. I'm going to keep doing some kind of technical improvements because I've got a lot of gear from my previous studio before I moved it here into my spare bedroom. Robert Sanderson asked, what email? It's team, T-E-A-M, at 10thamendmentcenter.com. Let me just type it in the chat. Well, the @ made it kind of like an @ my user account there, but it's team at 10thamendmentcenter.com, all spelled out. So anytime you get a follow-up on something like this, or if you hear about a bill in your state being introduced, I do my best to monitor this. So does Mike Meharry, so does TJ. We all kind of work hard to keep an eye on these things. But if you hear about a bill being introduced, good or bad, send us an email. If you hear about a hearing, you see a news report, whatever, something interesting related to what we're talking about, what we're working on, send an email. I don't always get a chance to reply, but the more information, the more engaged we all are, the more effective we're going to be in this movement for liberty. Again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. And of course, as normal, I'll be back on Friday and every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here at Good Morning Liberty. Of course, smash that like button and have a great day.